So a few weeks ago, just before Christmas, one of the best Sonic mods, honestly really ever, came out for Sonic Forces. Now, hold on a moment. I'm sure just hearing the name Sonic Forces triggers a fight or flight response in most Sonic fans, but this mod, Sonic Forces Overclocked, might as well just be considered an entirely different game. Now, I had heard a bit about Sonic Forces Overclocked before it was released, but anything involving forces in the past just didn't really catch my interest, pretty rightfully so. But boy am I glad that this mod exists, and that I actually decided to give it a shot. This mod plays almost nothing like base Sonic Forces, besides the fact that the button layout is the same, and is a genuine treat for Sonic fans to enjoy. Seriously, huge props to everyone that worked on this mod, because I can only imagine how big of a task making Sonic Forces actually fun to play must have been. Alright, so enough with the intro rambling. I'm gonna get right into what makes Sonic Forces Overclocked so fun to play. Okay, first things first. What exactly is Sonic Forces Overclocked, and how can you go about playing it? Well, first off, Sonic Forces Overclocked is of course a mod for Sonic Forces that sets its story after the main events of Sonic Forces have taken place. This mod completely replaces all 30 stages in the base game of Sonic Forces with 9 brand new ones. But that's not all the mod does. It also has a completely new story focusing on an overclocked Phantom Ruby, is fully voice acted, has brand new comic styled cutscenes, and new music to go with it all. This mod is pretty much just a fan game that uses Sonic Forces as a base. Imagine the Unleashed project for Generations, except it's all completely original levels, and has a story, and is of course in Sonic Forces. And that's basically what this mod is. So how do you play the mod then? Well, first, you're gonna need a copy of Sonic Forces, but please make sure you buy it legally and don't pirate the game just to play this mod, because that sets a bad precedent for mod makers in Sega's eyes, and it could potentially lead to more mods like this not being allowed in the future, which would be a huge loss for the Sonic community, because the modders here are genuinely some of the most talented people in the entire gaming space, and don't deserve to be struck down by Sega if people pirate their games just to play some mods. So anyways, once you obtained your legal copy of Sonic Forces, you're gonna need to get the Hedge mod manager if you don't already have it, just to make things easier, plus it's just nice to have in general. And then you'll also need to download the Sonic Forces Overclocked mod. I'll have both of those linked down in the description, so you can just head down there for easy access to them. Make sure you also follow any steps listed on both of those pages, since they do provide a step-by-step process on how to make sure everything is actually working. So once you've got the mod downloaded, just drag it into your Sonic Forces mod folder, and you're good to go. I recommend launching it via the Hedge mod manager, just to make sure it all works properly, but other than that, you're now good to play it. I definitely recommend going in blind if you haven't played it yet, especially keeping your expectations in line with how Forces normally plays, because this mod will blow you away with how good it is. Now that you've installed and or played through the mod, it's time for my review and thoughts of it all. Sonic Forces originally released to mixed reception, which has gradually turned pretty negative in recent years, so the last thing I expected was to ever actually enjoy playing something that involved forces in any way, shape, or form. I mean, the Sonic game with the most lackluster gameplay, extremely boring story, and just overall wasted potential actually being fun? There was no way. So I had to see what all the hype was about when this mod was released. I was skeptical because I didn't think fixing Forces controls or story was even possible, but this mod manages to not only incorporate parts of Forces story into a pretty good narrative, but also makes the controls feel pretty good, and creates level design that somehow plays into the strengths of Forces uniqueness, which I didn't even think was possible, but these levels are some of my favorite boost levels to play through in any mod, and even some mainline Sonic games too. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still prefer Sonic Unleashed's super quick reaction-based platforming and level design when it comes to the boost levels, but these honestly kinda felt pretty close to that at points. There aren't really any sections that are super platform heavy where you need to slow down and make precise movements, like in Sonic Colors or Generations, which are the parts that I don't really care for in those games, since Sonic usually controls like a tank with bricks for wheels, and while Forces Overclocked isn't really too different in regards to how Sonic controls, since there weren't any extremely precise platforming segments, I enjoyed pretty much all of these levels. Now, just because they don't require precise platforming doesn't mean that these levels are easy. Trust me, I didn't even get a single S rank on my first playthrough. It just requires a different skill set, one that I'm personally more fond of. And just because Sonic controls similarly to how he does in past Sonic games doesn't make that bad either. Sonic's controls have been a pain point for a lot of 3D Sonic games after the adventure games, so while this mod doesn't completely redo Sonic's physics and all that, it does remove a lot of the jank and lack of polish that the base game of Sonic Forces has. Once I did end up beating the mod, I did go back through and S-rank every stage, which I must say are easily the best part of this mod. The levels here are all incredible, even the avatar only levels, because they actually have level design, and aren't just a mess of automated sections followed by extremely linear gameplay. A lot of extra pathways are present in every level, and each Wispin also has a pretty clearly defined path to follow when the avatar is present. These extra paths provide a ton of replayability, which I experienced when S-ranking each stage, because finding the optimal path is honestly pretty difficult, and for some levels, I'm not even sure I had the best, most optimal speedrunning route. These levels are a great example of how traditional Sonic boost levels should be, because while I can pretty easily point out a good level from a bad one once it's all done and finished, making one from the ground up is no easy task at all. And if you don't believe me, then just play the cyberspace levels in Sonic Frontiers, because most of those are pretty good examples of how not to make a traditional Sonic boost level. Another big part of why these levels are so fun to play is that they're almost entirely 3D. There are a very small amount of 2D sections in these levels, and when there are 2D sections, they're usually just small parts of old levels from the base game, just updated to actually be good. And I know making 3D levels takes a long time, which is why 2D sections are usually present in Sonic levels, and is probably why there's only 9 levels in this mod. But I will take a small amount of fully 3D, or almost fully 3D levels, over a lot of levels with heavy use of 2D sections any day of the week. And that's not because I hate 2D games or anything. Sonic 3 is literally my second favorite Sonic game of all time, but switching back and forth between 3D and 2D in a 3D Sonic game just always felt a bit awkward, especially when it happens as much as it does in games like Sonic Colors or Sonic Forces. So, suffice to say, the gameplay of this mod is some of the best in any Sonic mod, or even game, and it alone makes buying Sonic Forces worth it, which is something that I never, ever thought I would say to anyone. As I've said a few times already, this mod includes a completely brand new story that takes place after the main game of Sonic Forces. Episode Metal is the first thing you want to play in this mod because it lets you get a feel for the game, as well as explaining how the Phantom Ruby came back and how Metal Sonic got his hands on it. The story here isn't too complicated, nor is it super long, but hey, it's better than the main story of Forces, which I guess isn't a super high bar to clear, but it's definitely not bad. This isn't like the greatest Sonic story ever told or anything, but as a follow-up to Forces, this works pretty well. It mainly focuses on Infinite and Metal Sonic teaming up with an overclocked Phantom Ruby to reenact Eggman's plan, just without Eggman himself. Infinite throws Eggman into null space pretty early on, so he's really not in the story that much. The story is wrapped up pretty quickly once Sonic and friends destroy the Phantom Ruby core for a second time, but as a way to get you from level to level, it did pretty good. Now the real charm of the story here comes from the fact that it's all fully voice acted and has a lot of cutscenes too. These cutscenes are done in a comic panel style, so it's not fully animated, but that would take a ton of work, and plus, I think all these cutscenes look really good already, so I give high praise to all the artists that worked on those. I also want to highlight the voice acting in this game, because it is really good. A lot of the characters here sound nearly identical to their official counterparts, and if they aren't exact, then they sound super close, or sometimes even better, like in the case of Infinite.
Really in the mood to be double-crossed again.
I was really surprised at just how good all the voices were, because while I won't ever harp on different voices being used for the characters in fan projects, since they obviously aren't the official voice actors, I will absolutely highlight when the voices are good, or in this case, nearly perfect. Another thing I liked about this story is that classic Sonic is nowhere to be seen. Thank God. So the story is able to really focus on the stuff that matters. There's only one boss fight at the very end of the mod, but it's better than any boss in the base game, so I'll absolutely take it. It also has some pretty awesome music to go with it. Here, take a listen, and watch this genuinely fun boss fight. Once you beat the final boss, things are all restored to normal, and the story ends with Eggman back out of null space and Sonic back to doing some heroing. Now the story doesn't technically follow the canon aftermath of Forces, which is seen in the IDW comics, but that's like the tiniest of tiniest nitpicks that someone could bring up, and like, who actually really cares? So I definitely don't mind the ending wrapping up like this. So in conclusion, I better see everyone playing Sonic Forces Overclocked legally, because this is genuinely one of the best mods for a Sonic game ever. I really hope this one isn't forgotten about in a few years, simply because it's a mod for Sonic Forces, because it genuinely feels nothing like Forces, and is so much better, and deserves to be considered as one of the best Sonic mods ever. There's still a bunch in here that I didn't talk about, like the amazing use of old and new assets for levels, completely new vocals in the Avatar songs, and new character designs for Infinite and Neo Metal Sonic, but I wanted to make sure this video wasn't too long, plus I'd rather you all go and play the mod for yourself, instead of me just explaining every little detail of it. Sonic Forces Overclocked is definitely worth your time, and I cannot recommend it enough. Thanks for watching until the end of the video. This is my first video of 2024, so Happy New Year to everyone. This mod came out right before Christmas, so I wanted to make a video on it when it came out, but I was already focusing on other things at the time, so I just decided to make it now. Videos should continue back up as usual, and I've got a pretty fun one that should be coming out around February, so be looking forward to that. Other than that, don't forget to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and hit the subscribe button as well, and I'll see you next time.